Hello there everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm actually filming two videos side by side whilst also streaming. Now, one of the kind of tier lists that has been requested from me a lot lately, and it's the protagonists from the various Final Fantasy games. I'm gonna go with the core 16 as opposed to every Final Fantasy game, because otherwise it's just gonna get out of hand. It'll be another hour-long video. But I thought it'd be cute to kind of rank the protagonists based on various factors, their combat prowess, their lore, how engaging they are as characters. So if you fancy that, then come and chill with me and join in. I'm also going to be doing a makeup look whilst also discussing another event that I went to recently in another video. So if all of that is interesting to you, then perhaps consider subscribing to the channel and sticking around. So before we get started, I think that for this, like as we're saying in the chat down below, I am streaming this live on Twitch. You are more than welcome to come and join the conversation anytime I am streaming stuff like this. We're kind of discussing like what the metrics are for each of these characters. Like, is it just going to be from their main game? Is it just going to involve everything? So spin-offs like Dissidia or World of Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts, or there's loads of ways that you can go about it. And obviously there's with certain games, there's going to be little caveats because the character may have changed. There's multiple different versions of those characters. So there's going to be different takes that we can take from those particular situations. So hopefully we can come up with a semi-cohesive list, and you are more than welcome to comment down below and tell me how wrong we all are. Start with Warrior of Light, because I think that it's going to be more interesting to take the characters from their original continuity, as quite rightly is said there down in the chat below, because it gets really messy if you start including all of the other games. Like, does Dissidia count? Does Kingdom Hearts count? Does World of Final Fantasy count? Like, there's so many different versions of the characters. The argument as to whether the continuity matters or not is just going to make it messy. So for argument's sake, I'm just going to classify the OG versions of the characters. And despite that, despite the fact that Warrior of Light doesn't actually have a lot of character, I'm going to put him in B tier. You know why? Because the iconography is very there. He's very present. Like, the image of the Warrior of Light is used in so many different aspects. Like, he is the original. No, he doesn't have a great amount of story, but, you know, some of the others don't either, and I would put those characters lower down on this list than Warrior of Light. So I think that having Warrior of Light be any lower than kind of mid-tier would be unfair to the character, because he is Final Fantasy. He's actually my favourite protagonist, funnily enough. Like, if I was going to play Dissidia, just going off the visual and everything, I probably would gravitate towards Warrior of Light if the protagonists were my only choices. I always go for the antagonists, just saying. And that is a different video, I'm sure. But I do believe that from the original Final Fantasy, Warrior of Light is actually a fairly solid character, despite the fact that he doesn't have any story. Firion from Final Fantasy 2. I'm gonna be mean. I'm gonna put him in D tier. Like, I'm sorry. Even though he has a character, unlike the main characters either side of him, he hasn't got the same iconography as Warrior of Light. He's a named character that has no impact on the story pretty much whatsoever from the second he appears on the screen. Like, he gets his intro, he's had his town burned down. That's kind of his whole character. There's no development for him. There's no anything for him. He's just there, and a lot of the other characters, like Gordon or Minwoo or the Emperor or Leon, just completely overshadow him. And I think that's kind of a shame. So for that reason, I'm putting him in bottom tier. I think it's fair to say that Onion Knight also goes in D tier. I would put him in D tier above Firion, and that's only because of Luneth. Because Final Fantasy 3 is a little bit murky because there's two versions of it. But even then, Luneth is not that great. Like, he's not great. And I'll be honest, I probably should knock Warrior of Light down to C tier, because I sat there and said that I'm not putting the characters based on anything outside of their own games, and maybe it's a little unfair of me to be sitting there going, yes, but he's an icon, he's a legend, and he doesn't have as much character as like a lot of others, and that's not fair. But I would still put him above Onion Knight and Firion because he kind of just is that representation of the hero. Like he represents that icon better than either Onion Knight or Firion or Luneth. So I think that I'll readjust and maybe I'll stop fangasming over Warrior of Light a little bit. Cecil's a funny one. Like Cecil, I do think that Cecil's a really strong main character for 4. I really do. However, I can't quite put him in S tier, and I'll tell you why. It's because his story ends really abruptly. He's got a really good backstory. He's got a really strong sort of reason or raison d'etre. He's got a lot of progression. And obviously he has the whole redemption arc, which for a Super Nintendo game is very, very interesting. But the second he turns into a paladin, he kind of gets sidelined, like as a character, like in favor of Kain, Rosa, Golbez even. Like Cecil doesn't actually do a lot, and I am going to say this, he's terrible in combat. Like he is terrible, absolutely abysmal in combat. So you have a lot of characters that do really well. They have like plot armor, if you will, in combat. But Cecil absolutely is not one of those characters. He is a tank-ish. He has no AoE capabilities, so you're always stuck with a character that only has 1 attack. And he's not especially good at that. He kind of requires Rosa to cast Berserk on him in order for him to do damage at all. So he just doesn't do a lot after Mount Ordeals. And yeah, he just doesn't kind of, I don't know. I would put him in A tier because I do think there's a lot of quality to him, and I can understand why he's a lot of people's favourite protagonist. But I can't quite bring myself to put him in S tier. We all know that Bart's, well, not Bart's, but Final Fantasy V is my favourite Final Fantasy. That being said, I do not feel that Bart's is the strongest protagonist. I think he's a good protagonist, so I'm going to put him squarely in B tier, because I like Bart. He's amusing, he doesn't take things too seriously. He does actually have quite a tragic backstory when you look at like the Dawn Warriors. He doesn't have any particular relationship with Exdeath, but then no one does, to be fair. But I don't know, I couldn't put him above Cecil. I think that he's a good character. I think that he's there. He's a laugh, he's funny. Like when we look at spin-offs and stuff, he definitely has his identity as the happy-go-lucky one, and I kind of like that. Not that we're taking those into account for this video. But I would argue that he is as middle of the road as they come as far as Final Fantasy protagonists go. A bit of a weird one, because I think that it can be argued as to who the main character of FF6 even is. Is it actually Terra? Like, the game wants you to believe it's Terra, because that's the character they use in all of the spin-offs as the protagonist. Is it Locke? Is it Celes? Is it nobody? I think all of those could be argued. But I'm going to talk about Terra because it's the one the game outlines as the protagonist of FF6. And I'll put her in A tier. I think she's really good. I do not think that she's S tier yet. And I'll tell you why. Terra, again, much like Cecil, falls off. And I think that realistically, her story is... I mean, no. I think the reason that I'm putting her in A tier and not S tier is because her story is kind of replicated by other characters later on down the line. Kind of, if you think about it, like, maybe not mind controlled, but Cloud has like a similar kind of journey to Terra. Squall kind of does. There's a lot of Lightning kind of does as well. Like, they have this I'm an emotionless robot because of something tragic that's happened to me, and I'm rediscovering who I am through the conduit of the events of the game. And Terra, like, she does kind of find her place in the world. Like, that's kind of her arc. I do think that 6, much like 9, definitely is at an advantage for the ensemble cast it has rather than any one specific character. But I do think that Terra is one of the stronger characters in the game. So I would put her at A tier. If we were talking about Celes, I'd put her straight in S tier. I think that the one scene where she, that scene, the one I'm talking about. Well, there's 2 actually. The opera scene is pretty amazing too. But that scene elevates her to S tier. But the game doesn't seem to believe that Celes is the main character, so I'm quite happy to put Terra in A tier. So now we come to what I think is the big hitter of the franchise. Like, I'm sorry, like, I know that people love to argue about FF7. Cloud is S tier. He is. He is literally the first image people think of when they think of Final Fantasy. Like, he is the image. Like, he is Final Fantasy. Certainly from a popular standpoint, I'm trying to give some depth here to this gold by putting bronze in as well. And I think that he has every reason to be. And I actually really think he is a strong character. I like that we're only taking the original debut as kind of our metric here, because I do think that he's diluted a lot by games like Crisis Core or Advent Children. I think he's kind of debased by a lot of those. But I love the fact that he's a bit of a dork. Like, he's a bit dim. And you take a character as stoic as Cloud, and you put him in situations like Wall Market or the beginning of Sector 7, where you get the finger appear over his head and he comments on it. I think that's adorable, and I think that it's presented really well in base Final Fantasy VII. So I think that if you add up all of the metrics, let's not mention he's clearly the strongest character in FF7 in terms of combat prowess, it would be a disservice to put him any lower than S tier, if you ask me. Although I am certain that a lot of people are going to come for me in the comments and say that I'm wrong. But that's okay. Are we classifying 7 Remake Cloud as different from 7 Cloud? Maybe, but I'd still put him at S tier. Because for the same reasons. Like, design-wise, same character. You know, yes, his story is slightly different and his personality is slightly different. And I was really worried about Cloud's depiction in 7 Remake, because I was worried they were going to go too far down the melodrama route like they did with Advent Children. But they didn't. He was dorky, he was funny, he was entertaining, and still got that iconic image. Can't argue with it. So, now we get to Squall. Squall is a contentious one, to say the least. 8 in general is a very contentious game, but I will say, I really love Squall, like, on a personal level. I think that I come across, given that I talk to a lot of Final Fantasy fans on a daily basis, I come across 2 types of people when it comes to Squall. People that relate to him and therefore love him, because they're a bit more introverted, they're a bit more shy, they are a bit more standoffish. And people who hate him for the same reason. I want to put him in A tier between Cecil and Terra. Like, I think that I just really enjoy him. I think that he has another iconic kind of weapon and visual. Like, if you go to any event where there are cosplayers, you are guaranteed to see at least one Squall. I'm just telling you that now. Yes, it's because he's quite an easy cosplay, but people also really love him. Like, he's also got the gunplay, like the gunblade. He's got a lot of story to him. I mean, at least someone in Final Fantasy VIII does, because unless you're Squall or Rinoa, you have no story in that game. And I definitely don't love Rinoa, but I really enjoy Squall. I think there's a lot to like about him. I like his iconography. I like his combat. I like him, his personality. But I definitely think if any character is contentious here, it's going to be Squall. Now we have FF9. It's really hard not to just put Zidane in S tier, and yet I'm hesitant, and I don't actually know why. Because I love the fact that after Squall and Zidane, or Squall and Cloud, he is happy-go-lucky. He is more likable in terms of like being fun and silly, but he definitely still has depth. I mean, like, You're Not Alone is a thing. He definitely has a big relationship with a large variety of the cast, even the ones that don't really play much part in FF9, like Amarant and Freya. He definitely has ties to everybody in his own ways. And his relationship with Kuja is really strong. So I can't turn around and say that I'm just going to put him in S tier. I'm just going to put him there. I do think that he belongs there. There are elements of his character that I'm less keen on. Like, he is a bit of a lech. No, I'm putting him in A. I'm putting him in A. I don't think he's as iconic as Cloud. I just don't. I think when we're talking S tier, you've got to have characters that like really sell the game, you know? And I think that Cloud does that, whereas 9 Vivi does it. Because let's be honest, like when you think of FF9, Zidane's not actually the first character you think of. It's Vivi. And I think that that kind of... I don't know. I would say that it was more Vivi's story than Zidane's. And for that reason, I can't quite put him in S tier. But like, honestly, the hovering... I love Zidane, but 9 is so strong on all of its characters that I'm gonna leave it there, but I could easily change it over. Up to Tidus, I'm gonna say it's Tidus, because to be honest, Final Fantasy X is as much a story about Yuna as it is about Tidus. This is my story, except it's kind of not. But we're gonna go with Tidus. And I'm gonna put him between Zidane and Terra. I might bump, depending, because I've got a lot of characters in A tier, I might bump Zidane up. And I think that the reason that I'm putting Tidus where I've put him is because he is like a half of the complete story. The story is about Tidus and Yuna. It's a love story. It's meant to be half and half. Like if you put them together, Tidus and Yuna together, I would put them even above Cloud. I would put them straight above Cloud. So maybe that's how we should treat it. Like the main character of 10 is Tidus and Yuna. Like they are one story. Like that's their thing. If we're talking Tidus on his own, I'll put him here. And then I'd probably bump up Zidane to there. But I do think that the story is about the pairing together, at which point it easily elevates to S tier, above Cloud even. So I would put him at the top of A tier as a singular entity, and then I'll put them together as the very tippity top of the food chain, because they are an incredible dynamic put together. But if people want to like go back and go Tidus in A tier, what are you talking about? If they've skipped to the end of the video, then they can come back here and they can work out the explanation from that. So 11's a really difficult game to quantify, like the protagonist, because realistically, it's quite an old school MMO where you're the protagonist, but because it's an old school one, more like WoW than say FF14, you don't really play that role quite the same as you would in a single player game or even FF14. So I am going to judge this based on the character that Square Enix seems to push as the protagonist of Final Fantasy XI, which would be Shantotto. Shantotto is amusing. I'm sure she's quite funny. But I'd probably put her down here in C tier because she's not the main character. Like, she isn't. Like, you would say that Prish was, or Ayame was, or stuff like that. But, you know, honestly, I don't have enough experience with FF11 to be able to comment on that, which is something I'm planning on changing very soon, like possibly within the next week. But as things go, it's hard to judge 11, and it's definitely harder to judge 11 than it would be, say, 14, because 14, your character as Meteor definitely is showcased more. So I'm gonna put Shantotto there because I don't think she's like the weakest character. She has a story, but I wouldn't put her any higher than that. But with FF12, I do personally think that Vaan gets like hated on a lot, and I've actually made entire videos about why I think Vaan is underrated. That being said, I would still only put him in B tier. I don't think he's better than any of the characters above him. I just think that he gets hated on somewhat unnecessarily. I would say that the main character of FF12 is actually Dalmasca and not Ash or Vaan. And a lot of people argue that it's Ash, and I can see why. But I would say it's more about the political climate of the state than it is about any one given character. So, but Vaan does play his role well. Like, he is there as a grounding point for a lot of the characters in the game, whether it be Balthier, Ash, you know, Barsh as well. There's a lot of grounding that is done by Vaan. So I understand why people don't like him, because from like at a first perspective, he does look kind of like a nothing. But he's actually not. And if you really look into like what he does, if you want to, I have a video all about this, so I'd encourage you to check it out. It's, yeah, I think he sits at B tier quite happily. So Lightning is a difficult one. Lightning is challenging because the 13 story is very clearly intended as a trilogy. So like you're meant to take Lightning as a character across 3 games, as opposed to say FF7, where 7 was super successful and then later they made sequel stuff to it. 13 was always meant to be a trilogy, so it's quite hard to kind of take a story arc from just 13 on its own. But with just 13 on its own, because it's fair across the rest of the characters here, I'm gonna put her in high B tier, because I do actually like Lightning. Personal stake, I'd put her higher than this, but it's unfair to say why. It's because of the fact that I love the fact that she was in modelling campaigns and she kind of broke the 4th wall in ways that a lot of the other protagonists haven't done. But taking just the game into account, I think high B tier, below Cecil, above Varn, I think I'm happy to put her there. FF14 is a weird one because the main character is quite a contentious topic as to who that might be. Like whether it's definitely not Istola. Like this is the one situation where I will disagree wholeheartedly that with Square Enix and their portrayal of like who's the protagonist of FF14. It's definitely not Istola. Istola is the cover girl because she sells. I think it's Alphino if we're talking about NPCs, but I'm actually gonna go with Meteor or the Warrior of Light as the character here, which is your own character. And, you know, after chatting with people in my chat here, I think I agree in that certainly since Shadowbringers, like, you are given more of a character than you would have been ordinarily. But the ambiguity of that fact makes me think not to put him in S tier. So, but I mean, S tier, because the events around the protagonist are really strong, but I don't think that that necessarily translates to the character itself. So I'm actually going to put it in A tier. So I think that because of that, I don't think I would put him above Tidus or Zidane. And I think that the events of 14 are absolutely S tier. But to say Meteor is, I think is a push, given that he doesn't have much of a character until Stormblood Shadowbringers, which to me reeks of Final Fantasy 13's really good 2/3 of the way through the story. I'm like, that's not a selling point to me, but the events that come out from that point onwards are so strong, and the character development is very strong. For spoilers, I'm not going to say anything, but if you've played all the way to Endwalker, you'll know what I mean. I can see why you would put him higher, but I can't put him above Tidus and Zidane. So now we have 15. We have Noctis. Noctis is a really challenging character to place. I feel that Noctis sits at the top of B tier above Lightning, but below Cecil at the bottom of A tier. The problem I have with Noctis is the same as the problem I have with the game itself. If you include all of the other external media, the Brotherhood anime, like all of the bits and pieces, like the book, like there's so much external media that is required to make Noctis make sense that I can't put him any higher than B tier. But I do think he's still a relatively good character despite this. So I would put him at the top of B tier, but I wouldn't put him above Cecil or Squall or Terra, because I just feel like he's incomplete. But he's still pretty cool, and he's got a good iconography going for him. Again, if you go to a cosplay event, you're gonna see Noctis's. So it has that going for him, at least. So finally, we have Clive from Final Fantasy 16. So I haven't included, I will just say, I know I haven't included Ramza from Final Fantasy Tactics, who would absolutely be S tier. But because if I start including Tactics, then I start having to include all of the other games, and then we end up with a dirty great list like we had before, and you end up with an hour-long video. That being said, trying not to delve too deep into recency bias, I do think Clive is amazing. I do think Clive's a fantastic character. Do I put him above Cloud and Zidane? No. No. But close. I think that he is a fantastic representation of modern Final Fantasy and a much better representation than Noctis is. Because 16 has a complete story for the most part. Like, yeah, alright, some of the side quests drag on and whatever, but that's not to do with Clive's character. Clive's progression throughout, like, he has a redemption arc that isn't his to have, which is quite interesting. He definitely goes through a very wide range of emotions, and my favorite scene, like, I'm not gonna spoil it, but how do I say this without spoiling it? My favorite scene with Clive is showing a lighter side to his youth that you wouldn't have seen a lot of other characters display. And it was a very, very, like, poignant moment for me. It introduces another character in a really fantastic way. But he has a lot of serious moments. Again, I will try not to put recency bias into this. But even in a year's time, I'm probably still going to think of Clive as one of the best protagonists, even if I don't necessarily think of Final Fantasy 16 as one of the best Final Fantasies. Though I do still really like 16 as well. That is where I would put the protagonists of Final Fantasy through a tier maker. I wouldn't say I was set in stone on this, because like when I look at it, by personal preference, I might even put Squall a little higher. Cloud's not my favorite protagonist, but I think that he is the icon of the franchise. So I probably wouldn't, in a personal like standpoint, put him as my favorite. But I think his legend precedes him. I do understand why a lot of people like Noctis more than this. I do also feel that I would put Warrior of Light a bit higher, but that's because I'm biased towards Warrior of Light. But this is all a very subjective thing. Like, that's half the joy of Final Fantasy, is that because all of these games are so different from one another, and I said this when I tier listed the games themselves, no two people are going to have the same opinion, and I love that. I think that that's a fantastic thing. So let me know what your protagonist tier list would look like in the comments below, and maybe post your own one. I'll leave another link to the tier maker here for you to do that with if you'd like to. Come and join the conversation over on Discord or over on Twitch if you want to come and find me while I'm making tier lists like this. Then definitely come and find me on there. I am very lucky that I am now partnered with a cosmetics company, which a big thank you goes out to Gamer Glam Cosmetics. So if you're interested in that side of things, which is obviously very different to what I'm showcasing elsewhere, but perhaps consider clicking on the link for 10% off using code Joesephyr at the checkout, and you can do that. And obviously, I do always give a massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon, all these lovely people that you can see on the screen right now. And those of you who support this channel as much as you do, I am eternally grateful for. So thank you all very much for doing that too. And if you'd like a bespoke title card and all sorts of other benefits, perhaps click on the link in the description box for that too. Anyways, that's going to be it from me. I have finished like my Titan look. I think I'm quite happy with it. And yeah, we'll have to see if we can do Odin and Bahamut next. And that's the only ones I have left to do. So thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye now.